Now, joining us now as we consider what these events ultimately mean for the election cycle and therefore the way markets are pricing it, I'm pleased to say Jim Bianco is joining us. He is Bianco Research founder and president. Jim, of course, we know that there are some things that you simply cannot discount, and an attempted assassination of a leading presidential candidate is one of them. When futures open in less than an hour, what do you expect we'll see?
I wouldn't be surprised if we see little changed at this point. Let's go back and look at the last 3 months, whether you want to talk about stocks, bond yields, or the dollar. If you look at those charts, can you see in those charts the conviction date of May 30th or June 27th, the date of the debate? And the answer is largely is no, that the markets didn't wobble or change directions or increase volatility around those events. Now we have another event. Will this event change the direction where those two events didn't before? If it does, it's most likely because it's maybe going to be perceived as a potential wave election. It's one thing if Trump or Biden were to win the election. It's another thing whether or not they get the House and Senate that they need to affect their policy, because we tend to forget that, you know, a president could say, I want to lower taxes or raise taxes, but he still needs 218 members of the House and 51 members of the Senate to agree with him to do it. Otherwise, it won't happen. So I suspect that this will probably be more like June 27th and May 30th, and that this will be very little change in the market for at least in the initial hours or day or so until we think about whether there's broader implications.
All right, Jim. Well, how about we forget the Trump trade or the Biden trade, if there's such a thing here, for a moment, whether it's banks or solar stocks or whatever we're looking at. How about just the element of volatility here, uncertainty? We're hearing repeated references to black swans, uncertainty going forward. What does this mean for the VIX tomorrow?
Well, I think that, you know, you're right that there's always the uncertainty that it can change the outlook for you got to keep in mind, does it change the outlook for profitability? Does it change the outlook for the trajectory of the economy? And the events, as disturbing as they were yesterday, for now, thankfully, the answer is no, they don't really change the direction. So I don't think the VIX is going to go up as much, or I don't think that you're going to see much of anything else. And also, you got to keep in mind, too, that late last week, if you look at things like the VIX and if you look at the rotation in the market after Chairman Powell's testimony on Capitol Hill, we were already seeing a lot of churn in the market anyway, away from this issue. So if there is any churn in the market or an increase in the VIX, it's probably a residual of what was happening last week as opposed to what happened on Saturday.
Well, what about what has just happened thus far in 2024, considering the incredible lengths with which we've come, Jim? Are we not more vulnerable now to some kind of catalyzing event, potentially making the whole house of cards crumble? Or is there enough fundamentals that any kind of political risk or geopolitical risk, for that matter, an added layer of uncertainty won't be enough to be cataclysmically upsetting?
No, I think we definitely are. The economy has slowed. Inflation has come down. You know, there's talk of potentially more weakness in the economy. There's an old adage from the economist in the 1970s, Rudy Dornbush from MIT, that economic expansions don't die of old age, they're murdered. And whether or not an event comes along and throws the U.S. economy into crisis remains to be seen. Thankfully, or hopefully, it was not yesterday that would have caused that. But nevertheless, it's weaker. The economy's weaker, and it is more vulnerable. So part of that, does it get thrown into crisis, also is it vulnerable for it? And I would argue that, you know, basis where we were, they say, in January versus where we are now, the economy is a little bit more vulnerable. Now, I don't happen to think we're going to see that crisis come about. I don't think we're going to see any kind of a meaningful slowdown or recession. But you're right that given the type of black swan events we've seen, and given the vulnerability of the economy, it is something that you still have to consider that could happen throughout the balance of the year.
Jim, it's great to have you with us tonight. Jim Bianco, founder and president at Bianco Research. We thank you for joining us here on Bloomberg TV and radio.